So today I wanted to go through all of the samplers I've ever owned and rank them based on how useful they are as standalone beatmaking devices and how they fit my use case and workflow. We're gonna rank them based on their portability, price, and overall sampling capabilities. Let's get into it. So we're gonna start with Koala Sampler. As an app, it's $5, but I think with all the upgrades, which I do recommend checking out, it's about 15 or 20. The upgrades add some bus effects. They also add a piano roll, but with Koala as it is, it's an incredibly powerful sampler. I'm gonna put it in the A tier though, not the S tier, because sometimes I wanna get away from the screen, and this is all touch based, and that can get a little annoying sometimes for me. But you can fix that by using a MIDI keyboard. It's got really good MIDI integration. It also now can send MIDI out so it can control other hardware, which is awesome. So there's a lot of awesome flexibility. And then the SP404 integration that they added, I think a year or two ago, makes a massive change, getting the SP to act like a hardware controller for Koala, but then you can bounce back and forth. That being said though, those are not Koala as it is standalone. But if you're new to samplers or just want to check out a sampler on your phone, it's definitely an S tier. All right, next up is the Teenage Engineering PO-33. This is an awesome little sampler with some huge limitations though, and a lot of those have been fixed with the newer upgrade, whatever you want to call it, the EP133, though that loses a couple of bits of charm that make the PO-33 special for me. So let's talk a little bit about the PO-33. It's got 4 voice polyphony, so you can do 4 sounds at once. The one issue though is if you like to sample chop, which you can do with the bottom 8 pads, those samples can only be played monophonic, meaning if you wanted to send all of your drums into one of those pads, or like a drum loop that you wanted to chop up, you couldn't hit something like a hi-hat and the kick at the same time on that same pad. So you would have to use 2 separate sample pads at the same time. And at that point, you've already now used 2 voices of your 4 voice polyphony. So if you wanted a bass, a melody, and a harmonic sample, you got to choose 2. So there's an interesting limitation there, but sometimes that can be fun. I've seen people make full songs with the PO-33. Sometimes limitations are a great thing, but that is a big limitation if you're looking at a standalone sampler. Now, one of the biggest pros for me, or perks of this, is its really low bit rate. It's got, I think, like 8-bit resolution or something like that. Anyways, it's really crunchy sounding. It adds some really nice grit. If you're into that old school sampler vibe, this can do it at $100 instead of buying a old school sampler for $4,000 or something like that. The other really great thing, it is very easy to program on. It's very easy to just make something quickly and just jam out. My 1.5-year-old son loves making beats on the PO-33 and just running around the house with it playing. But all of those limitations for me in my workflow and as a standalone sampler, in my opinion, would put it in the C tier. It's an awesome little sampler. I think it's fun if you're looking for something for doing sound design. Oftentimes I'll send samples in here and then send that into another sampler like Koala or the SP. All right, next up in terms of price is the Roland P6. Now this surprised me when it came out last year. It's a bit unexpected. They just pulled out this sampler that is almost like a little brother of the SP404. It's got a lot of similarities, but it also does things that a lot of us were asking for in the SP404 Mark II. It's got a lot of similarities to the SP, a lot of the same effects, but you can only use one effect. But it's also got reverb and delay sends, which is nice. But beyond that, you get 48 samples, which is great, but that is also a bit of a limitation for if you're using this either for multiple songs or for live performance. One really cool thing though, it's got 12 voice polyphony, unlike the PO-33. So if you wanted a kick and hi-hat at the same time from the same sample, you can do that. It's also got a really powerful granular engine that can do some crazy sound design. It's also got multiple bit rates, so you can get some really nice crunchy sounds if you want that old school SP202 and even the lo-fi setting on the 404 and the 303. So a couple of the limitations though, I find, especially for the effects, these knobs or encoders are very flimsy. It's so cramped that trying to do live performance like I would do on the SP404 gets a little complicated. It's got a really nice quick mute function, and you can mute whole banks. But if you want to bounce between the additional 4 banks, you have to double tap this, and it's kind of like a dance you got to do when you're playing. And then the biggest limitation for me is the screen. It's a 4-character screen. So when you want to do some of the more complicated things that you can do on the P6, which there's a lot, the granular engine, all the controls on that, you got to go through a very convoluted menu. It's a very menu divey, and then the menus themselves are just little 4-character words, and you have to just kind of remember all of them. One thing I'd love to see is something that the Digitac does, which is have a really powerful app that basically acts as an expanded screen. And I don't know if we'd ever get that, but I would love to see something like that. So in terms of ranking, I love this box despite all of the limitations I've talked about. I'm gonna put it in the A tier. I could totally see this going in B tier because of its complicated menu divey-ness, but it's got so much in there. It's like 200 or 220 bucks. Internal batteries, so you can take it anywhere. All of those SP resampling effects and a lot of the per step functions they've added, while limited, make for some really interesting beat making. I love working on this. That's the thing. It's complicated, but I really love making beats on here, especially portably and things like that. All right, next up is the SP404 Mark II. Now, if you're familiar with this channel, you've probably seen the SP all over it, and that's because it's my go-to. So, I mean, I'm just gonna say it right out the bat. I'm gonna put this in S tier for me. This is like the jack of all trades in the studio. If I need it to be an audio interface, it can do that. If I need it to be an effects box, it can do that. If I need really long sample pads controlled by my Dado setup because of all the limitations in there, it can do that. If I want a live performance box, it's amazing at that. And I love making beats on here. The workflow just, for some reason, just clicks for me. And with all of the updates they've done ever since it released, adding a synthesizer, even though to make it a synth, it's a little convoluted sound generator. They've added a looper, which is awesome, but again, also has its limitations. But the fact that all these things exist just in one box, that's pretty portable. It's got, I think it's AA batteries. I've never used the AA batteries in here. I always go either a power bank into the USB-C or just USB-C into like my computer or laptop. It's just a studio chameleon. Whenever I need something, I know it can do it. Even if it can't do it super well, it can do it and I can make it work. And I love that. There are, of course, a lot of limitations that come with it. And the fact that they've crammed so much, even it's similar to the P6, I guess, but they've got so much going on in this box and they keep adding more that there's all these button combos you have to do to access the things it can do. But it's just an awesome piece of gear. Now, if you are new to the SP404 or need some help with it, I do have a cheat sheet and quick start guide for the SP404 as well as the P6 and Koala Sampler. I'll put those in the description if you want to check them out. But yeah, S tier for me. This is my favorite. If I had a desert island sampler, it'd be the SP. All right, next up is the Digitakt. Now, I'm putting this one before the others because I only have the Digitakt 1, not the 2. I know the Digitakt 2 is a bit more expensive, and I don't even think the 1 is still on the new market. You probably have to buy it used, but it's a great get at a used price for sure. So one thing though is I don't think this is really intended to be an all-around kind of sampler akin to something like the SP or the MPC. It's much more, I mean, even if you read the title, meant to be more of a drum machine, and I think like a one-shot sample, single cycle waveforms, things like that. But I love to just try and use samplers in ways they're not meant to be used. And as an actual sampler, it actually has some really good perks. Now, I don't typically use this to do things like vinyl flips because it's very limited in its chopping, but I love to send live instruments into here and then use the sample machines like Warp and Slice to just completely tweak the sound into something so different. You can also do things like take rain sounds and using the LFOs that are on here, turn those into hi-hats. Let's add another hi-hat. I know what we can do. Take this rain. So we're gonna trigger every note. We're gonna go into the LFO and we're gonna go to the sample start time, and then we'll go into sample level. Hear that swing? Let's hear it with the drums. And we can raise the pitch. A little bit reduction, we'll add some grain. There we go. Listen to that. It's really fun for just getting outside of your norm or getting through writer's block. Just take a sound and see what you can do with it with the work machine. It's awesome for that. Now, some of the limitations of the Digitakt that limit it for me have actually been solved in the Digitakt 2, but that's a whole new $1,000 or whatever have you upgrade. which I'm just not gonna do right now. So I have to rank the Digitakt as it stands as the Digitakt 1. With that being said, let's talk ranking, because as a standalone sampler, I'm gonna have to put the Digitakt in the B. It is awesome, but there are some limitations in terms of sample length and the lack of true sample chopping that I think really do bring it down from its true potential. With that being said, it's got incredible MIDI control. You can control 8 devices from it. And the programming and per step automation is just crazy. So what I like to do is offset all of those limitations by using this paired with the SP404. Now we have 16 minutes per sample pad. And what we can do is use these 8 MIDI channels to control pads. Each MIDI channel on here has 4 voice polyphony. So you can control a ton of pads on the SP and basically expand the memory and sample storage of the Digitakt with that. But that's not a standalone sampler. So that's why as standalone, I'm gonna give it a B, but as an all-in-one box and just music making piece of hardware, I would give it definitely S tier. It's an awesome machine, but as a sampler, there are some limitations. And that brings us to the Polyen Tracker Plus, one of my more recent additions. This is a tracker, which is a very different way of making music. It's a totally different workflow than any of these other samplers have. But it is sample based and you can sample into it. There's a ton you can do with the sampler. There's lots of effects you can bake in and things like that. The thing I find is all of that is through a lot of menus and it's all screen based. And that, like I said with Koala, is a bit of a deterrent for me. So that does bring the ranking down a little bit, but the workflow is actually really awesome. So trackers are per step based. It looks like an Excel sheet. It's typically a vertical workflow, but on the tracker you can make it horizontal. But what you can do because of that per step nature is go in and just make tons of per step changes within a track or within a single instrument. And these don't work in terms of instrument. Every track of its 8 sample tracks or audio tracks, every step can be a different instrument that you've loaded into the instrument pool. So for example, on track 1, you could have a guitar sample hitting on step 1, and then by step 8 you could change it to a piano note or a piano chord or a longer sample. And so you can do all these crazy things on this per step basis, change effects per step basis, all this stuff. And so that is awesome, but it is a very different workflow. A lot of it can be a bit menu divey. On the Tracker Plus though, they've also added a ton of synths that are very similar to what's in the Polyen synth that you see over there. And so having a ton of different control over synths and synth options, that's a huge plus for me because I love performing synths on top of things and stuff like that. Another con I've found, and if you know the tracker and there is a fix for this, let me know, but I can't ever get live audio playing over the patterns. I have to turn on the sample editor, and I love improvising sounds on top of tracks I've made, you know, like adding a guitar live. And so that's another big knock on the ranking for me as a sampler. Now, I think the tracker as hardware is really cool. It's also got multi-track audio, something I wish more hardware would do, and I know the Digitakt does it with Overbridge. Multi-track audio over USB is awesome because you can basically use it as a mixer, but also if you want to work largely DAW-less away from the DAW, you can then send in all of the audio as separate tracks and have way more control in the mixing phase, which is awesome. I'd love to see more hardware do that. So with all that said, let's give a ranking to the Tracker Plus, and I'm going to put it in the B tier. There's some limitations, the menu diviness and the screen base, which I totally understand. It's a tracker. It was made on old computers and all that stuff. That's not usually my workflow. So there we go. That's all of the samplers I've ever had. And if you want to check out how I actually use these samplers to make beats, check out this video next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.